This is the Clark Connection Podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and power. We'll dive deep into the stories and strategies that ignite personal growth and entrepreneurial fire. Join us as we empower you to take control, level up your leadership, and build the life you deserve. Get ready to rise, to thrive, and to finally become the leader of your own destiny. Let's go. Welcome to the Clark Connection Podcast. It's great to be with you. I'm your host, Aaron Clark, aka The Coach. We have a special guest today, and his name is Dr. Bob Smith. Dr. Bob is a chiropractic internist, and we're going to connect about many things, including our journey to being better people in 2025. But before we get into the show, I want to give a shout out to my sponsors. And first up, we've got Bobbie with the Comfy Quest LLC. And we've got Wayne with 7K Metals. CNJ Embroidery, Andrew with Automate Integrate Professional Services, and Joseph with Landscape King. Look, all of their contact information is listed below. Also, that you can connect with me on all social media at coach_a_Clark or via my website. Reach out to me, whether you're looking for personal growth, leadership training, that could be to speak at an event, conduct a training for you or your team, whatever it is, reach out to me and I will get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. But what we really want to talk about, Dr. Bob, look, chiropractic internist for 35 years. He helps people with their nutritional based problems related to their mitochondria. These are acquired mitochondrial dysfunctions. He is currently the only board certified chiropractic internist in the state of Louisiana. He's been doing continuing education and instruction for over 20 years. He's helped develop many programs for Medicaid for chiropractors, and he helps improve the quality of life using alternative approaches. So let's go ahead and get connected with Dr. Bob. And so welcome to the show, Dr. Bob.
Well, hello there, Coach A. How you doing, sir?
Man, I am doing great. Any better than I'd be twins, and then I couldn't stand myself.
There you go.
Super excited to have you on the show. I mean, we were chatting a little bit before that we got going. And so kind of the first thing I want to get into is that you were explaining about the mitochondria.
Yes, sir.
So let's get into it.
Basically how I got started working on mitochondria. And mitochondria we've known about for a long time. They're the powerhouse of the cell. And as we started looking at these things over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the amount of information has grown exponentially. I mean, it wasn't until really 1964 that they even really knew we had separate genes for the mitochondria. And the concept that they were the powerhouse has kind of been known about for a while, but we didn't know much about how it worked. And what happened is we've realized that mitochondria are the drivers of our basic evolutionary process of most species on this planet, including us. And when we look at us as a person and we go, okay, so what do mitochondria look like? What do their populations look like? In the case of your brain, is sort of a steal off of, thinking about billions and billions. No, this is trillions and trillions of mitochondria exist in our brain. And just in one nerve cell, we can have as many as 1 million mitochondria. And then every other cell has between 1,000 and 2,500 mitochondria. And our heart cells, those have about 5,000 each. So when you look at it, you go, and you said those come from our mother only. So the genetics for mitochondria only come from your mom. And on the ovum, the powerhouse that's going to develop the baby, there's 100,000 to 600,000 mitochondria on the outside of the egg. the ovum. And after it's fertilized and it implants, and within the first 4 weeks, you hit explosion development that's actually startling, because the amount of power that's needed to make the baby's brain during some of these critical times, it just baffles your mind, because we'll end up making as many as 30,000 cells a minute in our brain at certain periods of development. It's like, that's unbelievable. That much division is going on at that rapid a rate. I mean, it's hard to imagine that sort of thing going on, but that's what is required by the mitochondria. And what we're learning is those powerhouses dictate a lot of things. They're very resilient, fortunately, but we're finding that there's certain things that are making a difference environmentally that we didn't realize.
Well, I mean, that's just kind of mind blowing to think about. That you said trillions of mitochondria just in your brain.
Yes, and just in those parts alone.
That and like that you said, what, thousands in a cell?
Yeah, 1,000 to 2,500 in the normal cell in our body.
Wow.
So
I mean, that's one that I always thought it was just like one per cell. So
I did too. And that's when you see those sort of numbers, you go, okay, so the power is really a big thing. And when you hear that many number in your head, and you go, and how much blood supply and oxygen supply is used by your head? A large percentage. So when we work our heart, we're feeding our brain oxygen, and nutrients go up there. Well, that's where it comes up being a problem that we're learning now that we didn't realize. Like when we have intestinal problems, permeability problems, those colloquially termed leaky gut. And a lot of that has to do with permeability dysfunction of the lining. And that same problem there translates into what happens here is kind of important, because our gut is our primitive brain. And people go, primitive brain? Yeah, it's actually referred to as our second brain. And when you think about this, and I tell you that 95% of the serotonin, and we've all heard of serotonin receptors, right? And people that have been on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for their depression or something else, but we didn't realize that 95% of the serotonin in our body is made and used right in our intestines. And the largest percentage of melatonin is right in here in your intestines. So when you alter how well your intestines are working, you can only begin to think that that few percentage that's used up here, which is made up here independently on the other side of the blood-brain barrier, also depends on the same thing that makes it work in our intestines. So if we're eating things that are causing gastric problems, it's not hard to make a connection to understand why they're saying now that gut problems often translate into people telling you, I have a gut feeling. Well, sometimes that gut feeling is being the fact that you eat something that's making you have a negative reaction in your brain. Some people will tell you they'll notice this along themselves. They'll eat, say, lunch, and they'll have a lot of carbohydrates, and they notice, man, I'm sleepy as crud after I eat. I really feel like I need to take a nap. Well, it's not just the fact that we're using energy like we used to think to digest food. In actuality, part of it is some of those things we're absorbing, we're also transmitting into our blood system. It's going through our liver, and some of it's hitting up to our brain and producing reactions that are the chemicals we associate with depression.
So, yeah, I'll say it's got my mind all going. I'm sure the mitochondria up here are like a million miles an hour right now. So, with the gut health, and you're saying the second brain, like how would that, or your primitive brain, how does that All right, can you go a little bit more on there? Because I'm not sure exactly what I want to ask, but
Well, the intestines basically, remember, these are basically the chemicals that we've learned about that were used in our brain function. We've heard of serotonin, we've heard of melatonin. Those are neurotransmitters.
right.
They're also used in our intestines, neurotransmitters, because there's
Interesting.
quite a bit of nerves in the gastrointestinal system that's called the enteric nervous system, which is an entirely separate nervous system that they've identified that is sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, and this enteric nervous system. It's been broken down like that in Europe for probably 60 years. The United States really hasn't used that division system to talk about it, but in reality, your gut is a pretty important part of your life and your brain function even.
Yeah. All right. So say those three again that you said they've broken it down to.
The gastrointestinal system is what's called the enteric nervous system.
Okay.
And then we've all heard of the parasympathetic nervous system, the
Yeah.
sympathetic nervous system. It's that enteric nervous system that most people never get taught about, that's been known about for quite some time.
And so why do you think that we haven't talked about that over here, but they're doing it over in Europe?
I can't really tell you why. I just know that it's been like that. It's sort of like, I'll give you some examples. When I was in school, we used to talk about dividing up into subkingdoms. We said there was plant and animal. There used to be only two. Now, fast forward to today, most countries will tell you there's five subkingdoms, five different subkingdoms. And so that's like plant and animal, but then you've got bacteria, you've got fungi, there's whole different varieties. And then
Okay.
if you really want to get complicated, Canada and the United States tell you there's six, because we subdivided even once more. I tell people things have changed in the way we even look at things scientifically. Years ago, we used to talk in terms of ology. So you had biology, zoology, all these different types of programs that you'd look at as systematics to go down. Well, now we have an entire group called omics. And people go like, omics? There's genomics, which
Okay.
is DNA. There's transcriptomics, and people go, what? Okay, that's the transcription of something called RNA. Then you have something called proteomics, proteins, and there's a whole field about how they break down and form. And then they even subdivide it further than that, because you can break it down into lipomics, which is fats, and all these different processes we realize do different things biologically we never even realized. I mean, the fact that omega-3 oils now have their own category where they're called a specialized pro-resolving mediator, because these particular lipids do certain things that seem to downregulate inflammation in certain ways. All these fields are becoming much more broken down systematically. So as we look back on it, we say, how does this fit into mitochondria? Everything it runs that makes the mitochondria healthy turns out to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that makes mitochondria become inflamed or highly stressed, that's a bad thing.
And so moving, kind of circling back to with the gut. So is that why that there's been such the big push about how overweight we are as Americans, and the
Right.
obesity, and really trying to, hey, you guys have to slim. I know that's one of my goals for the year is to
Right.
lose about 20 pounds.
Well, see, one of the things we're finding out is there's this entire thing called obesogenic compounds or obesity promoting compounds, and most of us thought it was just the food we ate. Turns out it's not. BPA plastic and some of these other microplastics are turning out to mess with the mitochondrial programming. And the problem with that is some of these things are making us become obese. So this is not in any way what you ate that you were thinking of causing it. It's not just the fact, you ate too many calories. It can be also that you've gotten into these things that promote estrogen receptors to work inappropriately. Certain other things that promote weight gain that are misprogramming from environmental pollutants. And that's one of the reasons why, if you remember, just last year, for the first time, we added 6 chemicals that we want banned from our drinking water, because those chemicals are turning out to be that type of program that promotes fat development.
So I missed that. So what were the 6 chemicals that were in the water?
Well, if you go back and look at one of my videos, I'll tell you to look at the brain video. And it'll be a whole section there that talks about those compounds in the very first part of the show that'll show you. You can clip it out of there and take it and show it. And just show that what it looks like. And that was an initial thing that just came out. But we've been talking about some of these things for quite some long time. I remember most of us have been told don't eat microwave popcorn because of the PFOAs. That's one of the first compounds that are on the list that they're trying to get rid of.
Right.
Because PFOAs is the stuff we think of in non-stick pans. But it's also was used as a protectant for the bag of microwave popcorn so the fat didn't absorb to it and it would microwave in the bag, because it would retard absorption of oil.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's why it got in the microwave bag. Now, if you look, you'll see that several of the popcorn companies have taken it out of there because the EPA has pointed out that this is a problem, and that's what they've done it. So when you look at the new popcorn bags in the store, it will tell you PFOA free, because they have found that this is something we don't want. Same thing, you don't want to be using that old Teflon coated pot, because that surface material has been found to cook off into the water, into the food, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah. No, that's rather interesting, because I have noticed that that's one that my oldest son loves popcorn, so and I saw it on there. I was like, I don't even know what that is, but okay.
Well, it's important. You don't want it in there because it promotes disruption, like I'm talking about, of your system not doing things right, and will promote being fat. Now, that's kind of a startling thing to realize, but we're just now beginning to appreciate, because you have to remember, they're saying that 74% of Americans now are either overweight or obese.
Yeah.
Which, if you go back just a few years, I just happened to found an article, and it's very recent. I mean, it's not more than like 2012 or something like that. And it says 34% obese or overweight. Now, if you think about what that article says, and then you think about today, and you go, damn, that quick? It's kind of a startling amount to see that sort of a jump in those numbers. I mean, it was really quite surprising, because I hadn't realized it until I saw that particular article that I came across earlier today, and I was like, wow. Yeah. So the numbers are exponentially growing on us.
Yeah. And so now, when you were saying the BPA plastics, so like, what's an example of the plastics that?
Well, the microplastics are turning out to be a problem. That's that little video I did, Plastic Not So Fantastic. And it's kind of funny because it talks about the fact that we've got a issue of, well, the numbers speak for themselves. there's about 9 billion metric tons of microplastic and plastic in the environment now that we've produced since we started doing plastic. So when I say 9 billion metric tons, just make it a note. Everybody has their own metric ton on the planet. All 9 billion of us have a ton of plastic. And that's a problem because we now know that these microplastics are getting into everything and promoting problems we didn't expect. So that's why the government in the entire planet is getting involved in trying to do better things to deal with this because we've realized it's now is a problem. And people say, well, is this some type of conspiracy or something? I tell people, no, it's not. We really did not appreciate a lot of this information until fairly recently. We didn't even have an EPA prior to 1970 when Richard Milhous Nixon created it.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have, the first time we ever heard about plastics being important was, I think of two times in movies. I think about It's a Wonderful Life when Jimmy Stewart's sitting there, I don't want any plastics. And that's way back then when he did that film, when he
Yeah.
was talking to the fellow on the phone in New York, not wanting to be in plastics.
Right.
And then the next time I think of plastics, I think of the movie The Graduate and Dustin Hoffman standing out there by the pool and they buttonhole him and go, one word, son, plastics. So this is not that long ago. Plastics has kind of come about as a new thing. And as we started figuring out how to make it, it seemed like an absolutely fantastic idea to make stuff because you could make all sorts of things. And it allowed for us to make products for dang near everywhere.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking is, so like, I mean, even this pen's got plastic in it.
So we're going to have to, well, and the bowling pins behind you have plastic coverings.
Yeah, I was about to say my cup's got the plastic lid.
So we're going to have to do some rethinking on things as we go along. And this is going to be where they're shifting to using different types of materials. But we really didn't appreciate this until fairly recently. So we've got some things we're going to be working on for the next few years.
Yeah, and just kind of what you were saying with like going to, so I'm going to be doing some research on the BPA plastics, because that, and I'm going to go look up, I know you'd sent it to me, the plastic not so fantastic, so I'm going to have to watch that as well. So I'm assuming that's anything that we're eating, drinking out of that's plastics, that forks,
That's
knives.
what they're telling us. We need
straws.
to do better. If you notice, I've got a ceramic cup.
Well,
and
I'm partial to ceramic coffee mugs, so
I am too. And I try to do glasses, and I try to, and stainless steel. So I'm giving, and then also try to remember we're trying to use the non-BPA plastic because they realize that's a problem, but we don't know where we're going to go really from there. We got to find more creative products, and I know they're trying to devise ways of doing it in engineering because we're still going to need containers to hold things.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking is just how much, I mean, shoot, I'm sure there's all sorts of plastic on the laptop that we're on or the computer that we're on.
There is. So we've got to figure out, we're looking for new ways. It's going to take some innovation and some, so the beauty is there's lots of work for people that want to go into engineering and science right now. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, but see, that's the cool, as you find and learn about it. And I mean, I know the show, mine was mostly about leadership and personal growth, but I think that's important to know even as a doctor, once you're getting this new information and changing to go with what we now have. That's what I've always thought was cool
probably
about
the biggest thing any of us are going to have to look at in the future is as our information base explodes on us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember at one time when I was in school, in high school, they were talking about information that had been doubling every 50 or 60 or 200 or 300 years. And then it had gotten to like every 4 or 5, 50 years. And I saw a quote on someone out of working for Google, and they're talking about the information, everybody's making information now, right? So we all produce things.
Mm-hmm.
With that type of number we're looking at, we're doubling the information or the data on this planet every 2.5 days.
I can see that.
But
I can vaguely remember in high school that whenever we would have to do research projects, you'd have to go through the encyclopedia. And they were like, no, make sure that you're using the most current one. And I was like, they all say the same thing. But they're like, no, this is the one from 1991. This is the newest one. So, or whatever year. And I was like, okay, whatever. But now, do they even make encyclopedias anymore?
I'm not so sure if they do. I know there may be a Funkin' Wagnall out there someplace, but I bet you it's not actually in print. It's probably digital.
Well,
and that used to be a running joke with the TV show Laugh-In was look that up in your Funkin' Wagnall.
Well, I mean, there's no need. You can pretty much put on one of these little babies, you could put a whole encyclopedia on it.
Exactly.
I mean, It's crazy how we've adjusted and changed over time.
Well, that's what I tell people. One of the books I always recommend people looking at is called Future Shock. Because Future Shock, if you haven't ever read it, is worth reading for nothing else to appreciate that he was explaining to us then in 1970. He was saying everything is changing so rapidly that people are experiencing what we call culture shock in sociology, but it doesn't require you to move anywhere to have that sensation. Just being present in your own day and realizing right here with what I have in my hand, I can look up the Library of Congress. Okay? And I can do as much computing as was being done on the shuttle that landed, or the Apollo lander that actually landed on the first moonshot. This thing has got more computing power than that whole module had.
And so is this the book you were talking about, Future Shock? Let me share my screen. Is it by Alvin Toffler?
Yes.
Okay, so this one.
Yeah, that's one of the colors of it. I've actually got one of the books classes. I've got a picture of it blue and one red because I have it as pink and blue because I started talking about endocrine disruptors, or the chemicals that cause problems in males and females. So his and her future shock. So literally we've got a question of, now we're talking about the disruption in chemicals I was telling you about happening differently on him than it happens on her.
Right.
So that's
I saw that they had like about 5 or 6 different colors, and I was like, I'm just going to do yellow.
Yeah.
Everybody likes yellow.
That's happy. The funny thing about it was that I picked the blue one and the pink one because it was like, okay, that works real well for my discussion. In the case of Future Shock, what it said was this. We knew what culture shock was. You moved into a new place and it felt uncomfortable. The food was weird. The people seemed different. They had different accents. It'd be like if you moved, say, into Baton Rouge or from Baton Rouge to New York City. And you notice, well, they sound different and they eat different things and they have different schedules. And, so there would be a what they call culture shock experience. Well, future shock is when we don't have to go anywhere. We can stay placed where we are, but I can promise you, it's somebody my age that you walk in and you show them this and they've never done anything but a flip phone, and they didn't like the flip phone. And you try to get them to do this and they look at you like you're crazy. I mean, I've got 2 sisters, both of them in their 80s, and I have made sure to get both of them iPhones to make them keep their brains going. And I tell people that's one of the things we have to do as we get older, keep involved in the technology that's coming up. Because,
Right.
well, you'll laugh at me and know it's the truth. You've had a lot of things change for you since when you got out of high school into college. And then I can tell you for sure it has with me, because the computer programming things that I was exposed to in college had punch cards. And people go, what? Yes,
Yeah.
the dinosaurs were walking around out front. We're using punch cards. Exactly.
I'll say with your stone and chisel.
Exactly. Sonny Chisel from a punch card. Right. But that's
I'm
exactly what it
laughing because
sounds
on
like when
another
you say that
episode
sort
I
of
did,
thing.
I pulled out the old Nokia brick phone. That was my favorite phone ever.
Yeah.
Um, so that's why whenever you said it and stuck with the flip phone, I'm like, man, if I
Yeah.
could use that old Nokia, I still probably would, because that's
But see,
about
the
all I use a
thing is,
phone for.
people don't realize that when you look at the apps we can download now, all the biometrics we can do
Yeah.
when we follow people, it's so different. And most of us don't even begin to understand that as much as this technology has changed now, it's capable of doing the same thing completely again in the next 10 years if we're able to keep up with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And that's where you have to learn to be comfortable with it. And I notice a lot of people, they get frustrated with technology, and I tell them, relax. Most of the stuff is designed where you're not going to break it. And it's pretty much not a problem with having to worry about it not working.
Right.
And, they've designed most of these things to be able to take a pretty good bit of inappropriate use before they mess up. And I tell people you just have to, just learn to work with it slowly and appreciate you'll get there.
Yeah. No, it is. It is. I mean, I know we're kind of getting close to time.
Yeah.
Uh, but what was, so there was one you were telling me about, the was it the acquired mitochondrial?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
the idea is that our mitochondria can be affected by things we now know that we didn't know about. So I tell people, if you use that term in your search, you go acquired mitochondrial dysfunction, and then before you, say you want to know about migraines, put that in first, acquired mitochondrial dysfunction, migraines, and see what shows up. Acquired mitochondrial dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, see what shows up. And probably the favorite one that you had mentioned you wanted to talk about was
Yeah.
acquired mitochondrial dysfunction, type 3 diabetes. And that goes to the brain.
Yeah. Now, just so for those that don't know, is the what is type 3 diabetes?
It is a type of Alzheimer's that's associated with our inability to process sugar appropriately in our brain. That was first talked about by Pennington almost 25 years ago. So Pennington Research was one of the leading research groups that actually came forward and put some of this information out quite ahead of the curve. And they're quite correct. There is definitely some factual preferences that show that our inability to appropriately handle sugar and fructose, for that matter, in the brain can promote inflammatory problems. And one of those being a type of prion made called tall tangle that's a specific one associated with a certain type of Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So let me ask this then: if we know that the mitochondria are what we're the major problem. So you're saying that's what's
Right.
causing it. So is there a way we could reverse something like if we had the type 2 or type 3 diabetes, or
Well, they're
like a
saying there
cancer?
is. They're saying that if we do things to promote less inflammatory processes, some of it being, we think of it being here, but it actually seems to start in our intestines and our liver. because that's where a lot of these misfolded proteins we're talking about start, originally in the liver. When the mitochondria of the liver get stressed, it causes misfolded proteins. And I tell people it happens in something called the endoplasmic reticulum. You don't have to get lost in the weeds. Just remember, we're talking about proteins misfolded. Think of an origami shop. Somebody makes little swans,
Yep.
all the little heads face the right way. Well, when they get misfolded, something called unfolded protein response with that endoplasmic reticulum, and that misfolded protein or unfolded protein response, the little swan heads go backwards, or one of the wings is not right on the swan. That's what a misfolded protein would be like. And some of those misfolded proteins they've identified as being called prions. And a prion, the only time I had ever heard of a prion before was in something called mad cow disease. Well, now they've identified 72 misfolded proteins that are different prions we didn't even know about. So this is sort of the thing that's coming up now. And it turns out those misfolded proteins, some of those also can happen up here. And they do quite often, we're surprised, but most of the times your body clears them out. There's a cleaning out mechanism for that up there. And as long as we keep that working well, it'll clear those out. It's when that mechanism for clearance becomes disrupted or the amount of these misfolded proteins gets too high, it seems to be the problem. We still don't know all the mechanisms yet. They're still trying to figure it out. But we know that it's beginning to shape up more and more that the stress that's caused on the mitochondria produce these unfolded protein responses that subsequently give us other health problems. Now, some of these proteins they're saying are like multiple sclerosis is associated with it, Parkinson's is associated with it, obviously Alzheimer's, and several other disease processes we're just now identifying. And it's not what we thought. I mean, you have to remember, we know so little about so much, and we know so much about so little. I tell people, when we still argue what is living tissue, a virus technically by itself is not alive. It doesn't have the properties of being alive. It can't reproduce until it gets into a host. So there's all sorts of things we're still kind of trying to figure out what is and isn't. What is it?
No, man, I was going to say, you got my mind circling and racing, and I'm like,
Well, we'll have to come back and think about some more things to talk about.
oh yeah, no, we will definitely talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. One that I did want to, I always want to talk about personal growth.
Yes.
What's the one book that you would recommend?
The one thing I would tell you that probably did, well, besides Psycho-Cybernetics, which I think was a profound book for me because it gave me a way to guide and actually look at steering. And I tell people, for somebody that has developmental delays like I did, it's very easy to use this because it gives you the binary idea of going yes or no. And it gives you a way to start making decision models. And that's one of the things I used it for. So when you start goal setting, and if you can't set pictures, you have to learn to do it adaptively different ways, which is how I have proceeded with most of my things. It has to be written because I don't get a visualization image of like I'm going in this place or even visualizing the goal line, if you will. I just have to do it in a different way than most people do.
No, that's pretty interesting that you say it like that, and it makes sense that many people, especially now, would need to do their studying and research to have the visual cue because,
That's right.
I mean, you've got auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learners,
That's right.
and
And this
it's
is
a
exactly
huge
what I'm talking
switch.
about because in one of the parts, and when I mentioned one of the books out there that I talk about, Amusing Ourselves to Death is the title of the book. And it's kind of interesting, but it talks about the different systems of learning. And one of them it talks about is oral history or oral tradition, which is the original way all of us learned because we learned by having stories told to us. And then the next way we think of is those people that were given the written word and able to now read and come up with the story by imagining what the written word was telling them. And then you have the auditory story improvement where we had radio, or actually telegraph, where we allowed to send a message to somebody and someone that could read telegraphy could turn back and read the story out to somebody. And now we got distance storytelling. Well, then radio did it another way. Video, as we're seeing right here, is doing it
Mhm.
an entirely different way. So the learning process has evolved, so has our brain. We're now proving that our brain pathways have evolved over time. And the best takeaway message I can tell anyone is we have not only the potential to stall brain damage, brain loss, Alzheimer's, we have the ability to promote brain development now. And we realize there is no rational reason to tell people you have to get senile, you have to become inept as you get older. In fact, if you follow what science is telling us, you can reduce the inflammation with lots of good scientific ideas that are out there now so that you don't suffer from those maladies or greatly reduce the probability of you developing them.
Yeah, and I would love. That's one we definitely will have to get back on and talk more about. I made sure to write that down. That you can
Yeah.
actually now develop the brain.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's the idea, the idea what we talk about here, just the whole reference ranges of,
yeah,
auditory storytelling and blah, blah, blah. We don't think about, we've seen in our own history of the last 200 years, people go from telegraph to newspapers, books, radio, and then we're having a video conference now, and I laugh because most people don't appreciate my humor, but I say the Jetsons. You can do telemedicine with your doctor now.
yeah, you
Or,
can.
or as
I'm still
Shaq
waiting for
says,
Rosie.
huh? Yeah,
I
Rosie.
still
Or
need Rosie.
Shaq says, I'm with Shaq. We need to find Leroy to put him on the Jetsons, and I understand his point. It was very, very sad that we didn't have Leroy or the Jetsons, but I think we can fix that soon. But I understood his humor when he
Yeah,
mentioned it because it's true.
yeah.
We just, culturally, we've been pretty slow about adapting to things.
And I'll say, oh, Shaq, he's quite the character.
Yeah, well, I thought it was quite amazing when he was the one that actually was taking credit for the guy who'd actually done the first T-shirt for the Jetsons, Leroy, first black member of the Jetsons. I thought that was fantastic
Yeah.
myself. So that's
Oh,
a good point to remember. So it's like I tell people, we are slowly learning things.
oh yeah. And so, hey, if anybody on here's list that wants to get in touch with you, Dr. Bob, how do they get in touch with you?
They can get me on the website. They can find me. They can call me at my phone number. It's 225-291-2626. And if they don't get through to me, I tell them, please leave a message. I will get back to them. I am a single operation, and I have been for some time. And I try my best to give people one-on-one customer service. I see lots of people with different problems. I tell people most of the individuals that I see some of them have simple things, and I just show them how to set up some programs for them to change some things. And then those that have bigger problems, we'll work with them.
Nice. And all of that information, guys, it's down below in the description. So if you want to get in touch with Dr. Bob, get your mitochondria looked at, try to get a healthier here in 2025, definitely reach out. Give him a call. You won't regret it. And as you can see, we've had a lot of great conversation here.
All right, Coach. Hey, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, sir.
The pleasure was all mine, and we will definitely be doing this again. What an awesome episode. I tell you what, Dr. Bob really brought it. A lot of stuff that he brought that was really eye-opening for me, and I hope it was for you as well. And a couple of key takeaways are, and for those of y'all watching, I've got it on the screen, that your mitochondria, they're essential for energy production and the evolutionary processes. And he also talked about how your gut health is related to your brain functioning, and that it's often referred to as the second brain. They're definitely going to get more into it with him on that, because that was so fascinating. Now, he talked about how environmental factors, including plastics, contribute to obesity and health issues. Acquired mitochondrial dysfunction can lead to various diseases, including diabetes and Alzheimer's. That's one I know I'm going to go take a look at. That's stuff that runs through my family. But then we also talked about how personal growth requires adapting to changes in technology and knowledge. I've talked about it on a previous episode where we've all grown to love change because we're not all still using a bag phone or the rotary phone or whatever else. But also, as our knowledge grows and changes, we have to adapt and be able to use that in our day-to-day lives. We talked about how we can actively promote brain health and develop as we age, and that no matter what it is, continuous learning and adaptation are keys to personal growth and professional success. And so look, that if you are looking for leadership or personal growth training, it could be for you, it could be for your team, it could be for an event, reach out to me. I would love to be able to help you on your journey and inspire you. Look, all of my contact information is listed below. You can reach me on my website or via social medias. So that website is www.coachaclark.com or on socials at coach_A_Clark. And look, it is below. Those of you watching, it is on the screen as well. But remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you gotta get started to be great. So keep leading, keep growing, and keep innovating. Until next time, stay inspired and connected, and I will see you on the next episode of the Clark Connection Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Clark Connection Podcast, where my goal is to add value to you. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow the show. You can also connect with me via my website, coachaclark.com, or on all socials at coach_A_Clark. The links are in the description. Huge thanks to my sponsors, Wayne with 7K Metals, Bobbie with the Comfy Quest LLC, Andrew with Automate Integrate Professional Services, Joseph with Landscape King, and Chris and Jess with CNJ Embroidery. We look forward to bringing you more great content. See you next week.